Russians came up with what they thought a genius plan to save Crimea, but let me tell you what, it is not going to work 100%. And today I will give you several reasons why and how sooner or later Ukraine will be able to retake the peninsula. More about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's go straight to the point and talk about this potentially upcoming massive attack of Russians against Ukraine. If you remember from my yesterday's episode, a caliber-carrying battleship of Russian Navy appeared once again in the Black Sea. And at the same time, Russians were reportedly bringing many military planes to Saratov region. And as you can see from this satellite image from Angeles airport, it is pretty much confirmed, as we can see several fighter jets and bombers. One of the main tactics of Russians at this stage of war is to target as much energy infrastructure of Ukraine as possible. And for this reason, and because of the most recent activity by Russians, I ask you once again, please be careful if you're watching this from Ukraine. Alright, and now let me give you an extremely quick update from the east. And first of all, according to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, Ukrainians continue their counteroffensive along Svatovo-Kreminna road. And at the same time, the main focus of Russians was around Bakhmut. And reportedly, they were even able to make some incremental gains. At the same time, there was some combat activity next to Pavlivka, and reportedly Ukrainians were able to destroy several Russian tanks. At the same time, Russians tried to advance next to Spirne, Yakovlivka, Bakhmutske, Avdiivka and Marinka, and Ukrainians were able to repel all of these attacks. But unfortunately, Russians were able to capture some territories. And as you can see from this map, which shows us the changes in territorial control, they were able to advance closer to Andriivka. But at the same time, Ukrainians were able to decontest the areas to the west of Bakhmutske and Pidgorodnya. Russians also captured a small part of land to the south of Mayorsk. And while Ukrainians contested the territory to the west of Pisky, Russians were able to capture a little bit more land to the north of Staromikhailivka. And then right here we can see that this grey contested area expanded a little bit further to the east of Vuhledar. But the most important battle in the east at this very moment is obviously the battle for Bakhmut. And as you might already know it, Russians bring as many forces as they can in order to capture this city. And even though they tried to do it for the last several months, at a great cost of many soldiers' lives, they potentially might be successful. Or at least they will give an extremely complicated fighting to Ukrainians. The next major events will be most likely coming to us from this region. And if you don't want to miss any of these updates, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. You can also follow me on Instagram and send me a message and I will reply to you. Alright, back to Bakhmut, where the fights around this city, especially to the south, are very brutal. It has even been reported that both countries constantly shell each other, and at some point the fighting hasn't stopped for several weeks straight. But as for now, Bakhmut still holds, and Russians are advancing very slow and making insignificant progress. And right here, for example, you can see once again another video of the conditions in which Ukrainian soldiers have to fight against Russians. And then on this satellite image we can see the alleged advancement of Russians, which is highlighted in yellow color. And even though it is not yet reflected by this map, Russians allegedly advanced to the west of Klishchinivka, with their next objective being obviously trying to approach Bakhmut from the south. And reportedly, the city is much more protected from this direction, and at the same time, Russians will have to cross several kilometers in pretty much plain fields. Which basically means they will become an easy target for the Ukrainian artillery, since there is pretty much no places to hide. And yes, Ukrainians, besides Russian military units, they also target the logistics of Russians in this area. In response to that, Russians mainly shell the positions of Ukrainians. And as always, more than 95% of the footage that I receive every single day I simply cannot use on YouTube. For this reason, I uploaded some of it to my Discord and the rest will be available on my Patreon. And if you want to see these not allowed photos and videos, the links will be down below. Alright, and now let me give you a very brief update from the south. And while I'm going there, let's really quick stop in Zaporozhye region. Because today, according to Russian propaganda, more than 2,300 Zaporozhye nuclear power plant workers were forced... they were offered the employment under Russian contracts. All of these workers obviously volunteered to take the offer they couldn't refuse, and some of them even received 20% pay raise. And speaking more about this region, Ukrainians reportedly were able to do several attacks against Mikhailivka, Polokhy and even Melitopol, which only pretty much confirms the intention of Ukrainians to advance in this area in the nearest future. In response to that, Russians were mainly shelling Huliai-Poli, Nikopol and Zaporozhye city. And yes, the Russian military commandment expressed their concerns about the increase of Ukrainian forces to the north of the border of this front line. Alright, and now as promised, let's talk about the south. And first of all, as you can see from this picture, in the most recent weather forecast on Russian state TV channel, they're no longer including Kherson as a part of Russia, which pretty much implies that Russia starts to denounce the claim over Kherson region. At the same time, the main activities of Russians in this area for the last several days was to fortify the defense lines and at the same time protect more the important logistics. In addition to that, Russians were shelling Chernobyevka, Kherson city, Antonivka and Berislav. In response to that, Ukrainians targeted the military units and military equipment of Russians in Holopristan, Radensk, Veliki Kopatny and Skadovsk. And another important thing, that several explosions were heard in Chaplinka, which reportedly is one of the main transportation hubs for Russians, and it includes the big concentration of military vehicles and military personnel. And according to President Zelensky, in only 1 week Russians shelled Kherson city 258 times, which affected 30 different settlements. And one of the infrastructure objects which has been destroyed is the pump which supplied water to Mykolaiv. And now let's talk about this brand new and already stupid plan of Russians, how they are thinking to protect Crimea. So, according to this article, Russians are building a road on Arabat Spit to transfer the equipment. And this Arabat Spit is located right here, and as you can see, it connects the territory of Crimea with Kherson, especially Khenechensk city. And the reason why they want to build this new road, it is because the one which already exists and goes through Armyansk is getting increasingly dangerous. Because yes, if you remember from my previous episodes, as soon as Ukrainians were able to retake the northern part of Kherson, pretty much the rest of the region, as well as north of Crimea, became in range for Ukrainian HIMARS. And so the logistics of Russians has already been attacked, that is why they need something new. And allegedly, they'll be using this new road in Arabat Spit to bring back and forth the equipment and weapons in the south, including to the cities such as Melitopol. So, the proposed idea for this, let's call it a project, looks approximately like this. And in addition to this upcoming land road, Russians will also have access to the railway roads and the bridge, which is highlighted in orange right here. But you know what? Just take a look at this picture from Arabat Spit and you can pretty much see that these roads are definitely not suitable for heavy military vehicles. And to be honest, that's one of the best parts of it, because if you take a look at satellite images, you can see that in some places the road becomes extremely narrow. And eventually, in order to cross to Kherson region, Russians will still need to use the bridges. And as you already know, Russians have a pretty bad reputation about their bridges suddenly being set on fire as a result of smoking. And so, even though I can give Russians a C for trying, here is exactly several reasons why this plan will never work. So, like mentioned previously, pretty much the entire rest of Kherson region, as well as a part of the north of Crimea, is under Ukraine's HIMARS control. And so for now, pretty much the only possible way for Russians to resupply themselves in the south is through Crimean Bridge. And since right now it is extremely complicated to send reinforcements from Crimea to Kherson and Zaporozhye region, they decided to build this new road in Arabat speed. And the first problem here is that it is supposed to cover more than 100 kilometers, which will take forever to build. And taking into consideration the notorious corruption of Russian politicians, I assume that this project will be completed like in 300 years. And the second problem is that as soon as Ukrainians liberate even at least a part of Kherson region, this brand new road, which will most likely still not be completed by that time, will already become in range for Ukrainian HIMARS. But okay, let's say so in the best case scenario, somehow Russians will succeed and they build this road fast and will be able to start resupplying themselves in Melitopol. Which brings me pretty much to the same story, is that Ukrainians don't even need to liberate the rest of Kherson region, they just need to cross Dnipro river and advance a little bit in order for their artillery to be able to reach this road. And if you remember the picture and the satellite images which I was showing you previously, you were already able to see that there is literally nowhere to hide. And in addition to that, this road in many parts will be extremely narrow. And because of this, the Russian military formations, which include soldiers and military vehicles, will have to move extremely close to each other. And with just one precise attack by Ukrainians, they will be able to eliminate many targets. And Russians will not even be able to retreat. They have water on the left, the water on the right, and behind will be their comrades. So as soon as the shelling begins and soldiers start looking for the places to hide, they will not find any. And because of this, just a few reasons, I honestly don't think that this plan to save Crimea will not work. But you know what, Russians are pretty famous for taking the military decisions which absolutely do not make sense, so we'll see how it goes. And yeah, once again, if you don't want to miss this moment when Russians decide to proceed with this stupidity, just subscribe to my channel, it only takes one click. And if you want to support my work, please consider becoming my channel member, use a PayPal link or become my Patreon, where you'll receive additional content. All the other useful links can be found to the right and down below. Thank you so much for your attention, товарищи, and see you tomorrow.